Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer and welcome to my channel. I'm back from a little bit of time away. So I was in Canada for about 3 weeks for a sort of conference leadership program thing, which was amazing and very, very tiring. But as a result has meant that my reading and videos have been kind of all over the shop. So there were lots of videos that I pre-recorded before I left. There's only one more of those still to come, which is the Booker shortlist and long list predictions and sort of eligible books, which will go out next week. But from here on out, it should be back to me post Canada, yeah, it's thank you also so much. I'm way behind on comments and everything, so I'm going to be catching up on all of those and getting back into it. Also, apologies, there are seeming to be like absolutely tons of like building work going on like nearby, so hopefully the background sound of that isn't too bad. Anyway, here are some of the books that I read while I was away. I didn't get a chance to read a great deal all the time while I was away, mostly just because I'd be in between sessions and I'd just be really tired and jet lagged and everything. So this is sort of a bit of a selection of some of my favorites from the books that I read while I was out. So let's go. First up, I read The Archaeology of Loss by Sarah Tarlow. And this was just sort of one of those books that I found just by sort of scrolling through BorrowBox or Libby or something, and just seeing sort of what kind of took my fancy. And this is basically a book of a really sort of beautiful non-fiction book, written by Sarah Tarlow, who is an archaeologist. And so a large part of this is when her husband starts to become ill and looks like he's about to die, she starts really thinking about death and loss in a very, very different way. And this book is a really beautiful way of her thinking about loss and dying, but also sort of applying her kind of archaeologist lens, I guess, to it as well. So it has an impact on how she sees her work, and her work has an impact on how she sees things around her husband. And if nothing else, this is just an incredibly touching and beautiful book where I think she really goes into a lot of detail about sort of some of the trickiness of it. So actually how we remember people is often quite up and down. We think we have a really clear sense of what happened on a certain day, but actually certain things complicate that. We have a very, we're very much centered, but we center our own thoughts on this a lot, right? We only really see things through our perspective. And so I just thought it was a really interesting and beautiful book, really, really poignant. The audiobook was just a gorgeous, a really gorgeous sort of way of kind of walking through this incredibly tricky subject. And I just found it a really beautiful book overall. Next up, I read Queer Life, Queer Love 2. And this is a collection of sort of short stories, poems, mini essay things, all kind of coming together to talk a bit about LGBTQ people's lives. There is a first volume which I'm due to read at some point. I really want to catch up and read, but a few people in here who I whose writing I know fairly well, and other people who I've never read before, which is really exciting. Also, the fun thing is sort of someone who is so Cara McLeod, who is a writer and also someone I know in my real life, is in this. So this was very exciting, and she's very lovingly signed her little bit. But it's also got Adam Smith, a few other people in here who I really, really like as well. And so I just really love this as a little collection of bits of writing, really fun to sort of dip into and find, a short story or a poem or something. And I think just a really interesting breadth of voices. So we've got, a wide range of ages, of letters within the LGBTQ plus community, of ways of approaching some of those identities. Really interesting mix. And so I really enjoyed this. And I think this was also quite a fun one while I was in Canada, because I could sort of dip in and out and sort of be like, okay, I'm going to read a little bit here and there. If nothing else as well, actually, the being away also made me realize how much I needed reading to sort of recenter myself. So there were some days where I was just running around and feeling like ragged and exhausted, and then we'd have a bus journey and I'd read for half an hour and feel like everything was fine with the world. So clearly that's something that I kind of in my heart of hearts knew that was a really important thing for me, but I think it was a really good demonstration of it. Anyway, to the book, this is also a really good opportunity for something like that, of being able to dip in and really enjoy some sort of gorgeous little bits of writing, and just really getting a sense of kind of different ways of approaching love and identity, all the way from a short story from Adam Smith about wanting to suck someone's toes, all the way to, you know, friendships breaking up, to friends becoming lovers, and all those sorts of things. It's a really interesting set of writing, and yeah, I really do urge you to pick it up if it sounds like it would be of interest to you. Next up, I also read The Biography of X by Catherine Lacey, and this is a book that I've been kind of eyeing up for a while. And I'd been meaning to read something else by her. I think Pew was another one of her books that was sort of seemed to be everywhere a couple of years ago. And this is a really interesting sort of style of book. It plays around with this idea of a reliable or unreliable narrator in quite a big way. So we have this woman who is this big kind of interesting character who is largely known to many people as X. And that's, you know, she's this artist, she's this performer, she is this sort of public figure. And this biography is written by her partner, who is sort of trying to piece together bits of her life. But the really interesting thing for me, I think, with this is that we suddenly realize how varied this person's life was. We learned that X went by many other names, and X was constantly shape-shifting and would spend a couple of years in one place being one person and then completely pivot and change to being someone else. And in some ways that was part of her life, in some ways that was part of her performance. And so the question then sort of appears of how do you love and support someone and feel like you know someone when they shapeshift like this? Because, you know, close friends of X's would say, oh, well, you know, she does this all the time, but also, like, yeah, you're nobody, you know, she'll move on from you before you know it, but then they're still together 10 years later. So there's this sort of question about, well, have they really been, you know, how have they managed to make that work? How has this happened? So I thought it was really interestingly done. I found it incredibly gripping in a way that I wasn't expecting. I think it has real moments of tension. It also has this real drive that sort of propels it forward, of trying to work out what this story is, and slowly realizing increasingly that we don't really know who X is as a reader or as an audience, and neither maybe does her wife. You know, that actually these things are quite complicated, even to the extent of, is she actually dead? You know, this sort of wild thing kind of appears in this book, and I found it really engaging and interesting. I also read The Late Americans by Brandon Taylor, and I was intrigued to try this one because I didn't really get on with Real Life by him, but I got the feeling that maybe it was just the subject of the book or whatever, and in some ways that was right, because actually I really enjoyed The Late Americans. So I think part of the thing that I found difficult with Real Life is there's a real sort of sarcasm and like sardonic tone that kind of goes over the whole thing, that at times for me felt a bit like he hated his characters. And not like you have to love them, but you know what I mean. And that parts of that tone appear in The Late Americans, but in a way that I found really convincing, because there's this group of characters, and in many ways, it's sort of looking a little bit kind of campus life. So many of them are university students or kind of studying in some kind of university level school. You know, some of them are at dance school. So, you know, we open the book with this whole thing around, you know, a poetry circle, like a writing group, at university, and how, you know, there's this real tension between, is like a piece of autobiographical art worth it because of the autobiography? As in, does that trump the skill of the writing? So, you know, if you don't write something particularly well, but it's incredibly personal to you and it's relevant to a certain group, does that outrank something that's very well written and crafted, but is not about, you know, that, and is maybe just, you know, a white man writing about war, for example. And so these things come together in this really interesting way, and it starts on that kind of sort of laced with this sort of sarcasm of sort of like, aren't these people the worst, kind of thing that kind of permeates through. And actually what I found really engaging was the way this book really deals with things around sex and violence in really interesting ways. It has some really interesting discussions, I think, around art and the value of art, and also where, you know, something artistic, again, is sort of positioned above, potential violence. So if a great artist does something wrong, and particularly sort of to do with violence or sexual violence, where does that line get drawn of where we then see the art versus the artist, all of that kind of thing. So Brandon Taylor is engaging with some huge topics in this book, and not very comfortable topics at that. But there was something about the writing that I just found really compelling, that really sort of drove this narrative forward. And we focus really on several different groups of people. And my one sort of criticism, I guess, would be that because there were so many different characters and groups of characters, I occasionally got a little bit lost. And then I also found that when the book ended, it sort of petered out a bit for me because, I don't know, there were so many big plot things happening for each character that it sort of ended on, I basically, because I was reading it on a Kindle, I still thought I had a few % left in the book. And so I thought like, okay, these are all going to get wrapped up. And then it ended. And I was like, oh, okay. And in some ways, maybe that's the point. In some ways, also, The Late Americans feels like the first in a trilogy or something like that as well. So I wouldn't mind seeing these be developed in further books because I think the writing was really compelling. And I thought the characters were really interesting, that the kind of dynamics of them were all really interesting. And I think a campus sort of setting allows a lot of really interesting interactions. But for me, I think, it just sort of ended on a bit of a sudden note. But I still think some really great writing and some really interesting plot points being covered there as well. There were a few others that I read over the last few weeks, but in the interests of not rambling on for ages with sort of about 10 books or whatever, one more that I just want to highlight here, and I might pepper the other ones in as I go to sort of other future reviews or whatever, or like a tag video or something else. Well, one of the other ones I really wanted to bring up is Corey Farr Does Social Mobility by Isabel Waidner. And I think Isabel Waidner is a genius. I love their work. I think that they just do some really wild and creative things with literature. Corey Farr Does Social Mobility. I don't think I understand what happened here, but I really enjoyed the ride. And that's kind of been my experience with a lot of... with all of the books I've read by Isabel Waidner so far. I'm feeling like it's kind of going over my head, but I just kind of love where we are. And so I might actually reread this because I think it's short enough that is doable, because it's probably about 100 pages or so. But Corey Farr Does Social Mobility follows the idea that at the heart of it, we have an author who has won a big literary prize. It's a literary prize sort of pushing against social evils. And there's a sort of interesting mirroring going on because Isabel Waidner won the Goldsmiths Prize, which, is a prize that champions books that sort of do really inventive things with form. And so that's kind of, that was Isabel Waidner's big prize win that has also meant that, for example, they are... they were kind of picked up by a bigger, more mainstream publisher, and things like that as well. So there's a kind of a little bit of an overlap with those things. But then where it kind of veers off is just so interesting. The book opens with an epigram, one of those, from Bambi, the film, about from Bambi's mother to Bambi, and it kind of carries on that level of bonkers thing all the way throughout. There is a character called Bambi. There is a character called Thumper, like Thumper from the film. And it's kind of this weird ragtag bunch of people. It involves something akin to time travel and or kind of teleportation. It's all this weird mishmash, and I kind of need to sit with it a little bit longer, and I kind of would just want to reread it because I think it's one of those things that will just offer up increasing amounts of gems as we go. But in typical Isabel Waidner fashion, it is a ride, and I just really enjoyed where it was going. I was just on a plane reading it being like, I genuinely don't really know what's happening, but I love it. So yeah, if that explanation hasn't put you off, please do give it a check and see if it's your kind of thing as well. Anyway, those are some of the books that I've read while I've been away for the last few weeks. There were a few more, but those are some of the ones that I really wanted to highlight, and I'll mention some of the others another time as well. Thank you all for your lovely comments while I've been away. I will catch up on them. I'm very, very far behind. But it's lovely to be back. It's good to see you all. virtually through comments. And thank you all for bearing with me while I just sort of put out loads of random videos that I've been wanting to do for a while and scheduled them all. Anyway, take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.